we're going to come back to you for a minute, Drew. But Emily, you're dodging the bullet over here.
I am.
But
That's her thing.
you, I didn't realize you grew up not that far from here. I know that's relatively speaking, but you grew up on a ranch. So how did your background inform your outlook today? And has it translated into what's happening on your family ranch at the moment?
So I grew up north of Wall. It's a very small operation compared to the surrounding area. And Dad does like wheat and for a commercial crop, and then everything else is pretty much fed. And then we have, I don't know, 30 to 40 cattle, Herefords. We like to be different. And I don't know, that was just growing up. We had cattle and crops, and then in high school I was in FFA and I did range judging, and I met like Ryan, and I don't know if Mitch was working yet, but I remember Ryan when I was in high school, like helping out with rangeland days, and so that got me interested in being involved in range in college. And so I got my undergrad from SDSU in range science, and then I went back and did my master's degree at SDSU, and so on another range project where we worked with producers across South Dakota looking at mock grazing. So we worked with 9 different producers from all across South Dakota and did some research on that. And then after that I was a student training with NRCS, so I've transitioned from went from grad school to NRCS right away. And so I guess working on a small operation where we I don't know, it wasn't like we had all the money in the world, so that's always translated to me to like working with producers who don't always have all the money in the world. You want to give them good alternatives when you're conservation planning with them, because not everybody can go to the bank and get a loan for like $30,000 to put in this pipeline. There's got to be other alternatives for them to be able to manage correctly but not spend like all this money. So that's been my experience, is working with producers that you can't expect them to make changes like right away, because there's always something else in the background that you don't know about. And that was kind of my experience.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us.
So I grew up on a operation in western North Dakota. It was predominant. It was about half annual crop, half grazing land, and the grazing land was rented out. So growing up, I didn't have a lot of hands-on experience as far as grass management, and my history on the place I'm at now isn't as long as some. My wife and I have been ranching for 10 or 12 years. After high school, I got a degree in range management and natural resource management, and went to work for the U.S. Forest Service as a range specialist. So I had a lot of professional technical training on grass management, but I didn't have a lot of hands-on experience doing it on my own. So when my wife and I got started, I had an idea of what I wanted to do going into it. I had the mindset that we were gonna graze rotationally, and so that's what we did. We started out with the pastures that we had, but we tried to split everything at least in half, regardless of the size. And that one of the limitations on that was water, and through predominantly EQIP contracts, we got a lot of water installed. And also through EQIP, the place I grew up on in North Dakota, we still manage that place. Help with the management between myself and a cousin of mine. We seeded all the crop ground back to perennial grasses, and we just finished that process last year. And so our operation's been everything. there hasn't been 2 years alike with the amount of land that we've been managing and cow numbers. So I can't really say that 10 years ago we had X number of cows and this year we have twice as much or whatever, because we've been so dynamic as far as what we've been managing that can't make a comparison. But I do know that the grass responds to rest, and that you can screw something up, but you can fix it with rest. Whereas with continual grazing, you know, in a sense, you're constantly causing damage, but you're not allowing the recovery time. And we're big on I like to graze stuff that hasn't been grazed in the past, you know, hay ground and CRP. That's enjoyable for me to get livestock on stuff that's been excluded for years for one reason or the other, just because I know that they're an essential part of the puzzle, and that you know, they are what will improve the land. Rest will help the land recover, but it takes the livestock to make a full recovery, I guess, in one aspect. And so our pasture sizes range from 10 acres to, you know, 400 or 500 acres. We also run on some national grassland, which has less flexibility in management. So there is times where, you know, we try to rotate as much as possible, but there's times we're forced to that we can't rotate. But anything that we have control of management over, we're rotating. You know, 2 days is probably the fastest, and 4 weeks is probably the longest. But our big thing is to provide rest for what we do use, whether it's, you know, we seldom graze anything twice in 1 year. Everything is usually a year-long rest or more.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Might I mention the grasslands that he runs on? When he started there was a 15% reduction because it was season-long pasture. And Drew and another gentleman in that pasture started CrossFit. I guess before you even started in there, they did some hot wire, but they're doing a rotational grazing in there. And the gentleman in the Forest Service said that was the worst pasture in all the grasslands that he'd seen, and now he thinks it's probably one of the better. That those two gentlemen have done a whale of a job making that ground recover,
Yeah.
and making it useful. And now they got their 15% back.
And we're also resting 10 to 20% of the pasture every year.
Okay. Resting, so in other words, not grazing at all.
Yep.
Not at all for the whole year, so it
Yep.
doesn't get grazed for a whole year, and then the next year they start in those segments. They've done a fantastic job in that pasture.
It's pasture 7.
Pasture
Yep.
7. It's just amazing.
And
The change in there.
Yeah, and that seems to be, that's a practice I like to use at home, is to not necessarily rest something for a whole year, but we always got grass the 1st of April, you know, because we intentionally grazed something early and rested it. Right. So that's part of our drought plan, is we always got to start anyway. Okay. We're not looking at nothing to turn into.
Got it. I'm just writing down thoughts here. Okay, I'm dying to ask this question. Ryan mentioned it this early, so this might be kind of. But talk to me about something like winter fat. What is that? And are you seeing winter fat? What? Yeah. Tell me about that, because I guess we think about grasslands as just grass, but it's a little bit more than that. Any thoughts on that?
Well, grassland is full of shrubs and forbs and different. I mean, it's a
whole ecosystem. You know, it's not just grass. But we were up to Gabe Brown's. You remember when we went up there and they were talking about cover crops and everything and how great it was, and they could extend their grazing season. And man, I'm all on it, you know. And so I go up to him and ask him this question. He goes, well, do you have any farm ground? I said, no. Yeah. Then why would you plant cover crops? I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, focus on what you have, and this become part of my deal is manage for what you want, utilizing what you have. And he said, do you have any winter fat? And I said, I don't know. And it took forever. I asked Ryan what it looked like, and he was trying to describe it, and couldn't find it. And we looked for it for 6 years. And then we had a pasture that technically I would have been out of it, but the cows got left there just a day too long because I was at grazing school, and kids couldn't get them moved or whatever. And it opened that canopy up, and the next year it had winter fat. And learning from Ryan that winter fat takes sunlight to germinate, well, we opened that canopy up and it took off. And so winter fat, it's a semi-shrub, and it's a 25% protein in the middle of winter, and cattle get fat on it, deer. And it's actually one of them deals that made this country when they come up here, is cattle could graze winter fat and graze year round. And so we had it show up in one little strip, and now from our grazing system where we get in, get out, and move it around, I've found it in 10 of them now, you know, and it's just like everywhere. And it's part of that hit it and let it recover deal. And it's just part of the ecosystem. So it's really it's kind of one of my favorite things. When we first found it, I went to a grassland meeting and Stan was there, and I'm like, I got winter fat. I mean, I was excited, you know, and he's like, it'll disappear. I'm like, no, it showed up, you know, and so, but just part of our deal. And them cows, they seek it out when they go in there, you know, in 3 or 4 hours, the winter fat's gone out of it. Well, but then it gets a year to recover and grow back. And, you know, we've got winter fat that's 18, 20 inches tall. And a season long system, they never get to see it because it's the cows seek it out. It is a sage. I mean, winter fat is, they call it winter sage or sweet sage, and it looks like sage. It's the same color as sage, but it has a real distinctive leaf. It's more star-shaped. It's not a branch so much like sagebrush. It's a straight up and has
I
full
like not a
leaf.
hay feather the way it comes up.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
on the bottom part of the leaf, it has a really distinct mid vein
Yep.
that really prominent, which sagebrush won't have. And it's a little lighter color too than sagebrush. Until you really know what you're looking for, you look at it all, it's all sagebrush, and then you find it's winter fat, and then it's like, wow, okay, there's one, there's
Yep.
one. Yep.
And it doesn't smell like sage has a sagey smell or sagewort, and winter fat has no smell. So that's part of and then it gets a real fluffy top when it's in seed, real distinctive.
And is winter fat endemic mainly to the northwestern part of South Dakota, at least in this state? Or are you going to find it in the rest of the state as well?
I don't know if we find it in the clay. I guess it's
Right.
well, it's in the clay pan. That's for some reason a lot of times we find it in the clay pan, and now like in Bart's case, it's spreading out where it's more in the loamy
Yeah.
areas and stuff.
But are you going to find it like East River or closer to closer
Maybe.
to the center of the?
Maybe not East River, but it runs all the way the gamut of America. I mean, from
Yeah.
the southern point of Texas all the way up to Canada. So
Okay.
That's
So
one of
they-
those things. I mean, we don't know what we don't know, in a sense. Or we think we don't. I don't know how to say that, but we think it shouldn't be over there, but we don't know if it shouldn't be over there.
It's not Roundup tolerant.
Yeah.
It's, and like Dan mentioned, Indian grass. We really shouldn't have Indian grass out here. But with these management systems, we're finding that some of those species are coming in. So we thought we shouldn't have it here, maybe we should.
So maybe kind of some of those surveys were done on what was thought to be pristine rangeland, and it might have already been degraded, and now we're seeing these species coming back.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Is that exciting? I mean, how does that make you guys feel?
Oh, it's really cool. Like we had a tour this summer and we stopped at the butte because some people wanted to climb it, and so we walked up the butte and walked back down, and some of the guys stayed at the vehicle, and they started counting species, and they got over to 60 and quit, you know, and figured there was over 100 different species in just this 100-yard strip, you know, and that was pretty cool even for me to hear on my own operation that somebody else would notice that all them different species. So I don't know how diverse it can get. I mean,
Well, I think that's cool because what us three are doing is letting those plants mature and go to seed and multiply. You know, the big blue stem that we're seeing,
Yeah.
you know, in our outfits is just amazing. I mean, I got a big blue stem that even Ryan says should be up on top of the butte. I mean, they're in strange places. You know, sand blue stem on a cut bank, you know, growing places you wouldn't think it should grow, and it's growing.
yeah, we've got that too, like little blue stem and big blue stem growing together, you know. It shouldn't, I mean, them are two different, we're taught that that's two different ecological sites. But
Right, but they grow together
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of them unanswered. Why is it growing there? You know, type of deals. Switchgrass growing in strange places too. You know, we see. But it's because we let it mature and spread. Seed, you know, we're always letting some pasture somewhere go to full maturity.
yeah. That's, we found big blue stem growing in hardpan this summer, you know, it's like,
Yeah. We'll find them.
yeah, I mean, this is awesome, you know, but yeah, it shouldn't be there, but
That's interesting. That's quite a thing about diversity, isn't it? Well, I guess the other thing I was hearing yesterday, which I'm not hearing here, so I'm wondering if this is sort of the diversity in terms of what you'd find in the central part of the state versus here. A lot of the guys are talking about a twice over system, where you guys talk about much longer rest. Can you comment about that? And is that sort of something that might be okay for there but not okay for here? Or are we on sensitive ground here? Talk to us about that.
I know it is for me because we're
I touched a nerve.
a little bit. One, we're in a more arid system environment. We used to have a twice over system, and we were losing soil health, losing biodiversity. I mean, it was all going backwards, and that was on a 6-month rest. Part of the deal with once over is like Dan was talking about getting that root to go down, you know, getting it down, because every time you clip it, you clip the roots, you know. And cows, you can talk about selective grazing or non-selective grazing. They're really non-selective grazers. When they go in somewhere, they just eat it, you know, and when they come back, they're gonna eat that regrowth again, no matter if you give it 60 days, 6 months, whatever. When they come back to that pasture, that spot they ate off before, even though it looks just like the others, they're gonna hit that first because it's regrowth. They're gonna leave that old stuff there. And so a lot of these weed grasses, or not weed grass, but problem grass, invasive grasses like brome grass or something, as you grazing them 2-3 times, you actually stimulating their growth. And what's happening is when you're coming back, you got big blue stem or something that's trying to grow and express itself. And now we're in July and you're grazing it off. And you've set it back and you've stimulated the brome or whatever to grow more. So but it does have a lot to do with the region because we're a lot more arid. But
Right. Any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think you look at western South Dakota, you know, it's a drier environment. We have a fairly short growing season as it is, just because of our temperatures, but we have an even shorter growing season because of our rainfall. It's kind of an old rule of thumb in a normal year that usually after the 1st of July, you don't expect for a lot of rain to happen after that. So I think those recovery periods that Bart's been talking about, and Dan too, are really important to, you know, let those plants kind of recover a little bit from grazing, because we might not have a lot more growth happening after the middle of summer. Maybe we'll have some in fall. But yeah, here we're more focusing on shorter occupation periods and longer periods of rest to provide that plant vigor and health.
And one thing about like the once over, like if you get to graze in green and you get your, like Drew was talking about, stock density, which is a huge important tool, and you're grazing green forage all the time, you're promoting a bacterial environment, and we need more fungi in our grass. So when you come in for that longer rest, you're using that browner material along with the green and incorporating that fungi into the soil, so it makes a healthier system out of it, you know.
To make a twice through, you need the right stock density, like Drew mentioned, that's pretty important. These guys they're well past the stock density that they would need to make a twice through work, just with the single rotations they're doing. And I've seen, and I guess in my opinion, by far more benefits with the diversity of species and controlling the invasive grasses, like the Kentucky bluegrass would be one for sure. It's a very short rooted system where if you just keep it in a vegetative state, that's all you're gonna have, and actually you're encouraging more of it.
It loves it.
It loves it. Where if you just go in, hit it hard, hit it once, that's hard, hit it once, and then rest, that's where we're seeing a lot of the diversity of species coming back in.
Yeah.
Beginning of the week, I was at one place over by McLaughlin, and it was, I took some, hopefully I took some good pictures, Colette.
Yes, I do.
Fence line contrast where one side, big blue stem and stuff, the other side, you can see where it's Kentucky bluegrass. And it's the same manager actually, but it's just how the rotation was, that there was, I mean, we really made a huge impact by having those native species coming back.
Right.
By just hitting it, grazing it early, and once, and then letting it rest.
Okay. Okay. Since we're talking about that, okay, I did want to ask about it. Just unpack stocking density for me. And remember, I'm kind of a fifth grader trying to tackle this. So unpack the whole idea of stocking density for me in your situation, and where do you, is there a range of stocking density that you want that makes work in this particular part of the world? Or is that an adaptive management kind of situation?
Well, stock density is the number of animals on a certain space. You know, your AUMs is completely different. On our operations, especially on these old CRP ground where we move every day, we want them as tight as they can, but we don't want to move twice a day. So we get them as tight as we can and get as many feet in a square foot as we can to have the animal impact spread the fecal material and the urine over the whole deal. Especially with our sheep, they have a tendency to camp on a high hill, and that's where all the manure and the urine is, and then the grass is the shortest. So we're trying to get our stock density highest on that kind of ground to incorporate the all the litter back into the ground, so we can, our organic material in the ground will increase, because this is old farm ground, you know.
Right.
So, you know, our stocking rate might be the same, but our stock density on a certain area is very high.
Gotcha.
So they're two different.
Yeah, it's kind of like you could have, you know, run a cow on 24 acres. You could leave her on that 24 acres for the whole year, or you could dense it down so that she has, you know, just impact on one certain spot per day, you know, through that, you know, or the herd you could multiply times 100, but.
So one has to be careful for rookies like me of conflating stocking rate versus stock density.
Yeah.
And so I'm almost hearing you say you're close to mob grazing when you're putting them, kind of possibly like emulating herds of bison or something like that. You're putting them in a real dense and then it means that your distribution of manure and urine is pretty uniform.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
But you guys don't have a certain goal as far as 200,000 pounds or, so it's just,
We don't.
We don't either, I guess.
Yeah.
We don't know where it's gonna
you
go.
combined your herds and make them one herd, and it just
Right.
kind of happened naturally.
I guess I kind of equate stock density as higher. If you visualize mowing your lawn blindfolded, I mean, you want grazing. We want, or I want every area of the pasture subject to cattle, whether it's eating, trampling, urine, feces, and as you tighten up that stock density, it's like how when you mow your lawn, you got a pattern, you go back and forth or whatever, where when you have low stock density, it's like mowing your lawn blindfolded and trying to get the whole thing covered. You know, you're gonna go over the same spot lots of times. There's gonna be places that you miss. And so the higher stock density allows you to put that necessary impact over more acres.
Gotcha. All that makes sense. South Dakota is not known for mild conditions. You guys always seem to have weather extremes, whether it's drought. This year in February, it was really, really wet weather and people were scared about getting planting. So this was our brothers in the row crop area. Talk to me about how you manage your lands to allow them to bounce back. What are the constraints that you guys have in terms of weather conditions, and how do you manage for that? What are the things that you specifically do? What are the things that you specifically see?
Well, in our operation, we have a drought plan. We use NRCS's drought monitor system to figure out by the 1st of May, are we going to be able to keep the yearlings? If it doesn't look like we can keep the yearlings, they go down the road. Or if it does, we keep them until August. So we have a flex herd.
Okay.
That's flexible, whether we keep them or not. They're going to be sold at some point in time. So if them 50 head have to go, they go. So, and we've got if it takes more than them 50 head, then there's another plan on that. So we kind of look at, the moisture from October through the winter to see what we've got. And right now it doesn't look good for next year. I mean, we don't have subsoil moisture. So,
Okay.
so the possibility of us keeping our grass cattle till next spring or through the spring is probably not likely at this point.
Okay.
But we'll wait till, March or April to make that, to pull a plug on that deal.
Gotcha.
So
You go.
well, Dan was saying, like the drought plan, we got key dates and things, and there's always, like even just running mother cows, we have what we call A, B, and C herd. So C herd goes right away, that way you can keep your core, B then next if it's severe. But like in the wintertime with our grazing plan is, our goal is to graze 12 months out of the year. The longest we've ever gotten was 11 months. But no matter what, if the weather dictates and we can't graze, then we move off the system and we'll put them on hay or whatever for that time being. But when it breaks and we can go back to grazing, we go back right to the same plot we left off. So that it changes our system all the time. It's it keeps extending it, and then sometimes when we'll speed it up for some reason. But if the weather dictates to us that we can't be grazing, then we pull them off for some reason. Like in 17 we had the drought, and we had actually sped our rotation up because the grass wasn't growing. And when we got to 10 months, we pulled the cattle off of it totally for 4, and put them in a lot. That's what we ended up doing, which actually turned out to be a good thing. But that's going to dictate all the time what, but we had already sold C and B herd, and we kept A herd, the core, and put them in the feedlot for 4 months. Well, then that was enough time that it changed, and we still had grass left there that responded when it got spring moisture. So then we were good to go. So it's really, I think with the weather, it's always being able to adapt and being able to pull the plug or do what you have to do, you know, and not hold on to the bitter end. We had a neighbor one time that run through 2 years of drought. The first year it didn't rain, he grazed all of his old grass off. Come the next spring, it hadn't rained yet. He ended up selling all of his cows for like $1,300 a pair. We sold C herd at that point, and because of our management, we didn't have to pull the plug on all of them. And then it rained, and we were ready to go, and he ended up buying heifer calves back for $1,300 a head that fall. You know, so economically, it's be watching ahead and not holding on to the bitter end, you know, to lose everything. So
Right, so a drought plan actually helps you to kind of have those decision points and decision dates. You were going to say something there, Drew?
Well, I'm always throughout the year, good year, bad year, I'm always taking note of how many grazing days an acre I'm getting, and then I'm extrapolating that out to see how much grazing I got left. I just did it this morning actually when I was in the pickup before I left home. I'm always calculating how many days of grazing I got out ahead of me, and that's kind of how I monitor and plan for if I got to send something down the road. And we run yearlings like Dan does as well, and that's kind of would be our first thing to go. And we were looking at that this year. We had a dry spring starting out, and then we had like 7 inches of rain in 10 days, and that, you know, a lot of times monitors and calculations will say that won't necessarily change your year, but in our case it did change our year, and we proceeded as planned. But you know, I'm always looking ahead at how many days of grazing we got, and I think, you know, this morning I figured we'd be into February, and then we got grass again for April 1st, middle of April. So, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. And we like to try to graze as long as possible. If you look at my hay yard, you might not believe me, but we got a pretty good insurance policy if something goes haywire. But we're always looking ahead to try see how much grazing. And the other thing we've ran into with drought is it's not only been grass, but water has also been an issue. Our natural water is no good in a drought. We got high sulfates, and that's, you know, another thing that we in our area have to look at, not only the grass, but what water we have available. And we've been, with all our pipeline systems, we're almost to a point where that isn't an issue, but that's another thing that we have to watch and manage through is, you know, we might have enough grass to carry us, but we don't have the water for them to drink. So that's another thing to manage through.